Hey everyone, so I'm audible, right? Okay, we'll start in a minute. Hope my screen is visible. Okay. So we'll continue from where we left yesterday. So yesterday we saw about basics of client-server architecture. So what is a client and what are the types of protocols that is used for communication between client and server, and what is the necessity of such protocols? And what are the use cases in which we need this server-side technology, server-side scripting? And what about cookies and authorization, and what are its use cases and why it is necessary in the server-side? Okay. So today we will see about this continuation of whatever we saw yesterday. Along with, we'll try to create a basic Spring project, and we'll try to see how it works. All right. Okay, yesterday's recording session will be today's, and we'll be both sharing the link. I'll inform Rahul as well. We'll do that. So we were talking about this HTTP methods, right? The communication from client to server happens through these HTTP methods. Are people aware of what are the types of HTTP methods? Everyone knows, right? Get, post, put, and delete. So we are aware of all these things. Why, yeah, post, put, and delete. So these are basic HTTP methods. Apart from that, there are additional HTTP methods which are useful, not at every time, but some additional times. So there is something called head, and there is something called options, and so on. Right? A head is nothing like you will get only the headers of the particular response coming from the server. Option is nothing but you will get only what are the types of methods available supported by the servers. Right. So you are saying get, post, put, and delete, right? It is not like just like that we can use all these methods across a domain. The server should support all these methods also, right? We'll see what is the server support very shortly. So understand that these are the request methods. And we also know what are the purposes of all these methods, right? Get request is used to get a resource from a server. Post is used to create a new resource in the server. Put is a two-way option. If there is an existing resource with a given criteria, it is going to update the resource. Whereas if the existing resource is not there, it's going to create a new resource itself. Right? It is deleting the resource, obviously. Right? So when I say resource, what's your understanding? Like, what do you mean by a resource? Any idea? Resource can be data which can be stored in a let's say resource can be of different formats, like it can be of a JSON format, it can be of an XML, or it can be of any binary format. So all these things are possible. And when I say JSON format, when I say I'm sending this particular input from the client to server in a JSON format, where it is getting stored actually. The server is going to process this particular data which is coming from the client, but where it is stored at the end of the day. Okay, someone was asking if I'm having the recording. We are having the recording, we'll be sharing it at the end of the day. Okay, coming back to the question. So I'm sending this JSON. How it is saved, where it is saved. Model is the representation of the data. Someone says model. But again, it should be saved somewhere also, right? This particular inputs which you're trying to give. It is obviously saved in the database. Right? So the purpose of the server is also to get all this information and put it into database also. It's not getting the data from the database and displaying it to the user. That is not the only use case. And also putting the data into the database as well. That is the important thing to know. So talking about Spring, if you go to this Spring website, see, we have to understand Spring is a framework which is written in Java, which is available and widely supported in Java, that is used to write the server-side scripting, handle this data at the server side. Right? Spring is not a programming language as such. Spring is not a library. It is a collection of many different libraries put together in a single framework. Right? So if you go to this project section, you will see like there are many projects that are ongoing, the current Spring technologies. Right? So obviously we are here to learn about Spring Boot, but it is not only about Spring Boot itself, right? Spring Boot is a just basic enabler of all these Spring related projects. It is you can consider the Spring Boot as a starting point of creating any Spring related projects. It's not going to be a kind of all in all kind of thing. For different purposes, Spring has different projects to do certain things. We'll see one by one. For example, Spring Boot, obviously, it's a basic project which is needed to do a server-side scripting. Right? So, okay, Ram says my voice is not very clear. Is that so for other people also? Or am I doing fine now? Hello? Okay. Let me know if it's breaking again. Maybe I'll change the earphone and try. We'll continue for now. So someone was asking, what is a framework? See, Java itself contains features which is going to support all these server-side scripting, right? So whenever you use this Java libraries to write a server-side code and expect some response, that particular thing in the Java world is called servlet, right? Have you heard of this word called servlet? I think it's a very famous word. Servlet is kind of nothing but a library in Java which is written to do one HTTP request and HTTP response, to manage HTTP requests and the response, right? Nothing but a Java kind of library to connect with the network. Right? When I say client and server is communicating, obviously it's going to communicate via a network like a local host or an internet. Agree or not? So you can think a servlet as a kind of gateway or a library. It's a piece of code which is written to connect our Java code with this network so that it can accept request and generate response and send it back to the network, right? This particular code is written for that purpose. So, but what is the problem with using this raw code? You can use this Java servlet, which is available in the Java X library. I will show that also if possible. So you can see, right, it's available in the Maven repository also. Okay. You can directly use this and generate a get request and put request and simulate all those things. But what is the problem is like it's not a user friendly, right? Today I'm going to give a small demo about how we are able to configure the Spring Boot project and how it is going to make our life very easier. But understand that before this advent of Spring Boot and all, even we had this project called Spring MVC. Right? Understand that it's very important to understand. Spring Boot is a kind of a project by the Spring people, Spring who is working on the project called Spring, to enable to start a Spring project easily. See, you have to understand, Spring Boot is just an enabler, or it's just a piece of code that is written so that every other configurations related to your server becomes very, very easy. Okay? Understand the Spring Boot is not a kind of library which is going to create, is used for creating your own servers. The library is actually called Spring MVC. Right? We should understand the difference between the two. Right? So Spring MVC is the actual library, or you can call it as a framework. To be able to have all these wrapper classes, wrapper methods over this regular servlet, Java X servlet, and it is able to better put all these together and give us as a complete package itself. So we have the servlet, but the second question arises is like, why we need a library like a Spring MVC over this servlet? Because when we have a servlet, we should understand there are a lot of processes that are going in the background to accept request, right? We saw what are the request type, get, post, put, and delete. There are lots of work going on in the background to accept all these requests and to generate a response. Right? But when I use a raw servlet, I have to do everything by myself. I have to create this code which has to manage all these get requests, and I have to create a class, separate Java class to manage the what response I'm going to give. I have to write a separate file to manage all the multiple requests that are coming in multiple environments. But whereas if I use a library kind of thing, obviously, what's a library? It's a combination of, or it's a wrapper of multiple libraries, which is previously written by some developers or open source projects contributors. So that makes our life easier, right? I can just use this Spring MVC library. I don't have to worry about what is present inside. It has some documentation how we have to use all these things. And what do we have to do? Just read this documentation instead of creating some 10 classes all by myself. Everything is provided by Spring MVC library itself. I just have to use those classes and methods and I don't worry about all these basic setups and configurations at all. Okay? I just have to use those classes and methods and directly start writing code logics. I can focus on my logics, but not on the setups. Okay, let me try to change my earphone. Maybe I think it will be. Someone was saying there's some disturbance in the voice. Just give me a minute. Able to hear me now? I hope my voice is a little better now. Okay, thank you. So the point being, the Spring MVC is a library which is written by the Spring developers so that it makes our life much easier. We don't have to worry about the core logics of how we are going to handle the request, what is the response I have to give. See, whenever there's some GET request coming to the server, I have to decide like what is the response I have to give also, right? Response can be 200, right? Response can be 400, response can be 404, 401, right? So I have to create all separate classes to handle all these response, which I don't want, right? But what if I have an inbuilt library to handle all these things? I just have to call this library and return the response 200. If it's a success, return 200. If it is bad request, return 400. What if everything is handled by a separate library itself? So one such library is Spring MVC. So only it's very popular. But the problem with Spring MVC, what people find out is, we will see next week, we will try to create our own project without using Spring Boot initially and try to understand what is happening there and what is the problem with the traditional project creation for web development, right? You have to create 2-3 XML files to make it operate. For example, whenever I don't use a Spring Boot kind of technology, right, I have to create this particular file called web.xml. Well, I'll say what is the purpose and all. Generally, there are 2-3 XML files that you will create, and I have to create this application context. What XML? So, what is the problem with these two XML files? Is like my development project will keep on growing, right? I'll show my development project actually. Maybe you get a better idea. As my project keeps on growing, I have had multiple packages to my project, multiple classes to my packages, right? Maybe 400, 500 classes across 50, 60 packages. So every time you create a new class, you have to go and put an entry into this application context.xml, right? Every time you create a new constructor inside, I hope I'm not kind of too much into Java. If people are not familiar with Java, right? I don't want to. I hope this constructor and creating a classes are kind of basics. I guess. I hope you are aware of that. Right? So a Java class contains what are the components of Java class? It contains basic methods, right? It may contain some variables like int, float, some declarations. It may contain constructor. It may contain some methods, right? These are basic constituents of a Java class, right? What if I have this Java class called let's say employee.java. I have another Java class called let's say student.java, which has similar kind of inputs, right? Similar kind of structure with variable declarations and method and constructor declarations. You can also add the student.java as one of the dependency for employee.java class. How I'm declaring an int or float, similarly I can declare a student variable also there, right? Student class member also there. So these kind of things has to be if I wanted to use the student inside this employee, I have to put an entry inside this application context.xml. Think how much complicated it is going to get as your project grows, right? I'm just quoting a simple example of student and employee. What if there are 10 different classes and all the 10 different classes I want to use in this employee? I have to go and put entry for every classes into this application context.xml. And if the project setup itself is this much complicated, who will come and write a particular piece of code in Java? Okay? So only in those kind of times, like I'm saying about in the early 2000s and maybe mid and late 2000s, one framework was very famous. I hope you are aware of this framework called ROR. Nothing but Ruby on Rails. Have you heard of this? Anyone? Yes, heard of that, right? So it was actually a full-fledged object-oriented programming language like Java, but without those complications of this project setups. Okay? It was much simpler and easier syntax to understand for people, and it was like go-to programming framework for back-end development. For quite even it's quite popular even now also. Even my company uses Java as well as Ruby on Rails. Why it is so popular? Because the startups, once a particular startup is created, particular startups are there, they don't want to directly dive into Java because the Java development takes some time. Whereas Ruby on Rails development is much simpler and easier compared to Java. You can initially start to scale very easily. I hope you are aware of recent Indian startups which are hitting all these unicorn status, right? This Cred, Pharmacy, Meesho. I hope you are aware of all those companies. Many of them uses Ruby on Rails even now. But why Java is still famous? Because Java, because of its scalability and because of its compiled nature, right? And it is much faster than Ruby. Ruby is not a compiled language; it's an interpreted language. I have to understand that. So when it becomes a compiled language like Java, it becomes much easier. And as you grow into an enterprise company like Google or Amazon, it becomes easy to scale. Java is much easy to scale, and network support on people and community support is widely available. So only as people scale, they move into Java. See, when we were in a startup mode, we had this Ruby on Rails. Nowadays, our projects are getting shifted to Java. So that's the difference. So Spring MVC, as I said, is a kind of collection of libraries which is going to make our life simpler to handle all these requests, get, put, and post, delete. But the people had this particular problem of application context.xml, unnecessary initialization of certain files. I'll talk about what are those files maybe in the upcoming classes. So it was much cumbersome to create a Java project, right? Comparatively to other programming languages. Then came the Spring Boot, right? Understand that Spring Boot is not a different technology. Spring MVC and Spring Boot goes hand in hand, right? Spring Boot internally uses Spring MVC, right? If a Spring MVC is there, Spring Boot is a wrapper to Spring MVC and few other libraries, so that we don't want to do all these additional complex things, right? Creating a web.xml application.xml. If I wanted to create new class, I don't want to put an entry in application.context.xml. Okay. So they have combined multiple libraries, and they have created this thing called Spring Boot. It's a project. It became very famous because of its easy to start go-ready nature, right? So what happened with the advent of Spring Boot? I have eliminated all these unwanted files. Setting up of a project is just a 15 minutes or 20-minute process if you know what to do, right? So the Spring Boot consists of a Spring MVC, and also we have to note 2-3 important things, right? We have seen about Spring MVC, and Spring Boot also contains a piece of code to read your property file. In Java world, there is you can create something called properties file. I hope how many of you are aware of what's a properties file? Anyone? No, no one is aware. I guess. Yes. Yes, in automation also we use this properties file, right? Yes. So what happens, like, if I wanted to do some configurations, I can put an entry into property file, and Spring Boot, what it will do, it's going to automatically scan my property file, read for certain keys, and if the key is there, it will initialize these configurations automatically. I'll give you one such example. Yes, I hope most of the people are aware of property file. And I'm repeatedly talking about this backend technology. I'm repeatedly saying it's going to communicate to a database, right? But how it is able to communicate? Right? We have to think about that. I'm giving a simple example of how a property file is very much helpful in a Spring Boot kind of environment. Right? Let's say I'm using MySQL in my project, right? I hope if people have worked in SQL kind of database. Okay, someone was asking when we will start Spring Boot integration with Cucumber. Why you have to start a Spring Boot integration with Cucumber? I don't get the point, because Cucumber is again a BDD testing framework, right? I said Spring Boot can be used to leverage a testing technology, but understand that Spring Boot is primarily for development, right? It is not going to be, you can use for testing, you can develop an automation framework, but again, there are no frameworks like Serenity, which is going to make your job much easier. We have to go for this Spring to create a development framework. For example, there's, you explore this if you're testing people are there in this particular session. There is this framework called Serenity, right? It's very powerful framework which is using this concept called dependency injection, which is also there in the Spring. We'll see what's the dependency injection upcoming classes. What is the advantage of Serenity? Why people are, most of the companies are moving towards this particular framework now? Even we have used the Ruby along with Selenium for our automation framework before 2 years. We have switched to Java and Serenity now because it is BDD. It supports Selenium. It supports REST assured. It supports reporting. It supports multiple execution, that is parallelism, multi-threading concepts, everything within the framework itself. You don't have to worry about anything at all, right? Yeah, what is the one thing that people have already worried about? Is the reporting. How do I, when I create a framework, how do I configure the reporting? How do I integrate BDD with Selenium, especially everything? Everything's available in a single package called Serenity, and which is an open source and free. So you just have to worry about the core logics of using a test automation. If people are interested, please do check this. What is Serenity? It's very helpful, right? So what is the use of Spring Boot in automation testing? Again, it depends. I'm saying about Serenity, right? If you don't want, you can leverage the same kind of thing using Spring Boot itself. So why we are learning Spring Boot? Why we are learning development is, if you learn development, you get to know what is happening in the backend. If you get to know that the testing and things becomes much simpler. To get those concepts becomes much simpler for you. And if you're a person who is aspiring to move into development, I think this course is going to be of much help for you. Okay, for your developer, it's great to hear, right? Again, if you wanted to use this particular thing for testing, I don't know why you wanted to use this for testing. So again, it's up to you, totally up to you. Right. So okay, we'll move on. So whenever I say MySQL, right, there are 2-3 things which is important to connect to a MySQL instance. For example, I have MySQL running here. Right? Just now I logged in here. So when I wanted to open a MySQL connection, I will say in my local, I will install MySQL. I just say MySQL -u, which represents this user, right? Which user? I'm a root user. So I didn't configure any password for this MySQL instance in my local. So when I hit enter, it is going to open a connection in my local, right? So when I say show databases, it is going to list all the databases for me, right? And so on, right? You can create a databases and you can open one database. You can create tables inside the databases. For example, let's say use is a keyword in MySQL world is going to use a particular database. Right? Let's see. Okay. So once this particular use command is set, it says database change. If I wanted to see what are the tables available here, I can just say show tables. It's going to list a table. So these are 2 tables available in this database, right? If I wanted to describe this table structure, I can say describe stack. It's going to list me the what are the columns available in the thing. So you see here, this particular thing is called MySQL-u root is called connection string. You have to understand, right? This is a connection string. Every SQL database will have this kind of a connection string for us to be able to be connected to a database, right? Whenever you host a database in a cloud or a server, you will have a connection string in the form of URL itself. It will be something like HTTPS, some IP address / some endpoints, right? Along with this -u root. And if you have password configure, it will be like MySQL. It will be something like this: MySQL -u root -p for password, and you type the password 1 2 3 4 whatever. It will be like this. And I also understand that MySQL generally runs in a port called 3306. All right. So that is what it is. So you have this connection string, you have this username, you have this password. What if I give all these details in a configuration file? What if my Spring is able to automatically read this properties file and establish a connection automatically without we doing any of the thing? Generally in Java, how you establish a connection between a database is there's something called JDBC, right? Java Database Connectivity. How many of you have heard of this framework or library called JDBC? Yes, JDBC I have heard only, right? So whenever I use JDBC, I have to create 2 3 files. I have to say that what is the connection string, how to configure. I have, if it's a MySQL connection, I have to install the particular library, MySQL library, and I have to say class dot for name MySQL, and have to establish a connection and want to insert and delete everything. But when you use Spring Boot, it becomes much easier because you just have to give 3 information in the properties file. What are the 3 information? What is the connection string? What is the username? What is the password? And Spring is going to automatically establish this connection for you, right? That is the power of Spring Boot. So only for all these purposes, right? All this making of things much easier for us, Spring Boot is kind of used, right? Okay, we'll go to Spring Boot. There is something called Spring Initializer. If you go to the Spring project, if you go to this something called Spring Initializer website, it's going to take you in this particular page, right? This is a page which is a kind of de facto to go whenever you wanted to create a new Spring project, right? And before moving on, before creating the project, I also wanted to understand from you, like, what is this Maven and Gradle? Anyone have seen this? Okay. Someone says it's a build tool, right? Someone says dependency management plus build tools. Totally correct. Dependency is like I wanted to use some libraries. I don't have to download jar files and add it into a project. And I just have to use this dependencies section, just to copy a dependency from Maven Central. Here libraries will be automatically downloaded, much simpler. Many people know this particular Maven, especially from testing community, it as a build tool. I mean, as a dependency management tool. But what is a build tool? Why we call this Maven as a build tool? What is a build actually? Can anyone post in the chat or question section? Why we specifically call that as a build? Yes, someone I think answered it. So jar or var file for our app, exactly. So build is nothing but it's like dependency is fine. It's going to handle all the dependencies for you. But at the end of the day, what you're going to do, you are going to compress and package it as a single package, and you have to run it in the server. For that, either you have to run as a jar file or a var file, right? So that is what we call build, and it manages the entire life cycle. Someone was posting the life cycle also. Yes, absolutely correct. So build, there's a many life cycles for build, clean, test, and verify. We'll talk about all these things. So kind of Maven-like thing is not only used for dependency management, but also life cycle of entire manage life cycle of the entire project, and also use as a build tool to build this entire project as a jar or var package. Yes, which we can deploy in the server. Exactly, right. So I'm going with the Maven project. That is also very, very famous build tool. I'm currently going with Maven. I'm choosing the language as Java. Maybe I'm going, it's a 2 latest version, I guess. Maybe I'll go with 2.4.6. And this group and artifact ID, right? We'll come to what's the group and artifact ID very shortly. Maybe I'll give a name. Let's say hello.world. Right. Let's keep this as a demo and demo, and description like hello world demo. And if you go to this section called add dependencies, this is a very important section which you have to know. There are a few things which you have to add as a dependency. Let's go with this. So this is very, very important. Spring Web. This is the core of the Spring technology, MVC said you, right? So without the Spring Web, we will not be able to create our project itself. So this is very, very important. We have added that. Let's see if we can use any other dependency. We'll go with the Spring Boot dev tools also. It is kind of a very useful utility. So that if there are any changes in the project, we don't have to build it again, rerun it again, restart the server again. And the dev tools is going to automatically do that for us. So that is why we call this as a framework, right? It's a collection of different libraries which is going to use for different performing different functions, and that's going to be useful to us somehow. So only the Spring is called a framework, which is a collection of library itself, right? We'll use the Spring Boot dev tools. Maybe let's see what else we can use. See, there are JDBC APIs automatically given by the Spring itself. You don't have to do anything. We'll come to this part little later. I don't think we need any other things. See, if you are using multiple databases in your Spring project, everything is given in here itself. You don't have to go to a separate area to search for all these dependencies and all. Just see here what are the things available in the Spring Initializer. If you are worried about security, the Spring security is there, OAuth configuration is there. If you wanted to your applications to run OAuth kind of things. And yesterday we were talking about this templating, right? On JSP is one kind of templating engine. Similarly, Timeleaf and Apache FreeMarker are two other most famous, apart from this JSP, I'm saying, templating engines, which is currently in the market, right? And if you see this, if I'm connecting to a SQL database, I just have all these things, right? I don't have to go to the other place to look into, right? And for NoSQL databases also, Spring provides a support. To understand that if I'm using, definitely we are going to use some database with Spring, but we don't have to use and run these libraries separately. Spring itself provides this additional wrapper class, which is Spring compatible. And you can use this for, if you are using MongoDB, you can go and use this library. If you're using Redis, you can go and use this library, and so on. Right? Doesn't need additional support at all. Right? So in this session, Spring is a much wider community in this sense, and it's much useful, right? So I think we are good. And you see, even if you wanted to connect to a cloud using your code, Spring provides a support for Google Cloud, Azure, AWS, everything, right? It provides a support. I think we are good to go with this. And we'll choose the Java version as 8, right? So yeah, for Postgres also support is there. I think you can search here. The Postgres driver is there, right? Most of the famous thing which you find in the market supports are there in the spring.start.io. Maybe I'll ping this website in the chat window. Maybe you can note it down. Right. So yeah, so far so good with this page, right? Why we are doing this? So I'm selecting a build tool. Understand that without a Maven or Gradle kind of project, you cannot create a Spring Boot development project, right? So that is important. And we are giving some basic packaging, group ID, artifact ID, and description, and what is the packaging that we need, and what is the Java version, what are the dependencies, right? I think we're good to go. So I click on generate. This project will be downloaded for me. Much simpler, right? I don't want to create a new project from scratch itself. So I'll open this. Maybe I will let me keep it here itself. Let me say demo. I think it's 23rd May, right? Back. Okay. So next thing, I hope people. I hope many people would have worked on at least basics with Java. Right? If I'm not wrong, at least the basic hello world programming. If I'm not wrong. Okay. Okay. So we have this Eclipse, and going forward, we'll use this Eclipse to create any project or update the projects. So once you go here, you say import, and Eclipse, talking about Eclipse, there is something called workspace you can create to import multiple projects, okay? And you have to install your Java in your machine so that Eclipse is running fine and properly, right? Some basic things, and you have to configure this Java home in your environment variable or path variable. So mine is Maven project. I'm trying to import a Maven project. So in these options, I'm going to expand this Maven and say existing Maven project, right? Click on next. I'll browse it. So this is the project. We'll check. So it's able to detect this prom.xml. So now it's able to add this particular thing in our workspace, right? So yeah, if you open this pom.xml, you can see here the dependencies which we have created is downloaded. The dev tools we have said, right? It is downloaded, and Spring Boot started web is downloaded. I think that is it. Yeah, we are using Java version 1.8. So we have mentioned this group ID and artifact ID, right? So those things are available here, right? So does this look familiar? This group ID, artifact ID, and version, have you seen anywhere this kind of configuration? Yes, we have seen, right? So whenever we try to download or import any library, we go to this Maven, and you see the section called group ID and artifact ID. I'll show that. You people are aware of this library called Apache Poi, especially from testing background. I hope many people are aware of this Apache Poi library. What is this used for? It's for Excel reading, right? So if you wanted to import this dependency, I can say Apache Poi Maven dependency, and it is going to take us to the Maven central page. And if I wanted to select any version, I'm going to this version. And if you see here, you can find the same thing, group ID, artifact ID, and version. Same here as well. And same with respect to our project as well. So what is the difference? Nothing. So they might have also had this Maven kind of project and created this group ID and artifact ID with respect to their Maven, like whatever how we did right now. And they would have given their own name.
and they would have packaged this as a jar package. Like what we saw this build tool. What's the purpose of build tool? To package our project as a jar or war, right? So they might have packaged these two things as a jar, and they might have uploaded this in the Maven central repository. This is how you create a library and upload to a Maven, right? You have to have a Maven installed in your project, and you have to have this group ID artifact ID version. So this is how you do that, right? Okay, and if you see this project structure has changed. This is a typical example of a development project structure, right? You have this src main Java, you have this src main resources, and I was talking about this application.properties, right? You have here, and I was also talking about how you can give the MySQL connection string, username and password, everything here. It's going to automatically create this connection for you. You can do that here itself. We'll be seeing how we can do that in a right manner. Just assume something like this. If you're connecting to a local host, it will be something similar to this data source dot URL equal to maybe you can say localhost 3306, right? And data source dot username equal to root data source dot password equal to null empty password. So this is a rough configuration of how it will be, right? The URL will be something like HTTP localhost 3306. So this is how we configure this MySQL connection. That is it. And understand that the key word, the name, it's going to be the name which has to be specified from the Spring documentation. You cannot give any random names here. That is one you have to take care. And values is obviously the value which you configure. So this is how you do. Right now we'll delete all these things and start from basics, right? So you all know what is a Maven structure, right? So you have this src main Java, you have this src resources for all these properties file, Excel file, whatever the resources you have, right? And you have this src test Java to do your unit testing, especially in development world. This test package in the testing world, it's a main package to drive your test, right? But in a development world, this test slash Java is primarily used for unit testing using JUnit, right? And we have this pom.xml and so on. So if you open this package, you can see some default class that is created for us using Spring Initializer itself. So I was talking about this configuration. I hope you all remember. Like what is the XML configuration we might need. I was talking about when we don't use the Spring Boot. I was also talking about how we wanted to register all these things in application context.xml, web.xml, and many additional configuration files are there to start your project. But with Spring Boot, there is only one file to start your project, right? And that file is this application file. And there is only one annotation that is going to handle all these configurations for you. That's called Spring Boot application. That's it, right? So once you use this annotation, I hope you people are aware of what is a Java annotation. Anyone? How to create one? Have you used this? Okay. Okay. I'll just show a simple example of how you can create an annotation itself. You can see here. When I say new, it says annotation itself, right? I can create my own annotation also, right? I can say way to automation. Okay, few people have said they have used test ng annotations. Okay, maybe I'll draw a comparison between what is that and this. So as you can see that I can when you use annotation, instead of interface, it says at interface and your annotation name. It goes by that, and you can use these annotations for multiple purposes over your class name or your method name or whatever, right? When we talk about this test ng annotation, what is going to, let's take a simple example of let's say what is the purpose of this attest annotation? Can anyone say? What is the purpose of that? Yes, it's going to identify this particular method as a test case, right? A particular method might be annotated with attest annotation, might not be. How it is able to find all these things? Hey, in this class, in this these are the methods that are annotated with that test, and I have to execute these methods only. And in testng, you have this priority also. You can set the priority also, right? Inside this attest annotation, you can just say priority equal to 1, 2, 3. I hope you are aware of this priority setting also, I guess. Okay. So you can set a priority also. How we are able to set, how it's able to read this priority and execute on based on that. Everything is happening at the background, right? So if you wanted to do something in the background without your code logic affecting, you can create an annotation, and you can probably drive this everything in the set of code which are not primarily visible to the user. So how it is able to read this priority? I have created on annotation, right? Weight automation annotation. You can generate the fields into priority and all. You can set the priority, and you can read this annotation. What are the methods that are annotated with this particular annotation or class that are annotated using a Java technology called Java reflections, right? Reflections are going to be a kind of Java very powerful library that is are going to return the runtime properties of your particular Java class. I hope people are here are aware of the reflections. If not, please go and study what's reflections. Very, very important and very powerful tool as well. Right? So through Java reflections, I will get to know what are the classes available in my project and what are the methods available with the attest annotation. Right? And then it's much simpler for me to process. I can get this attest annotation and can get its properties, put it into a set. I can execute this method based on the set value. Right? It becomes much simpler in that sense. Okay. So similar way, the Spring Boot application is going to process many things for you. All these configurations I was previously talking about, initialization, boilerplate code. I hope you know this term called boilerplate code. A code which is required again and again to do a particular operation or to initialize a particular project which is defaultly required is called boilerplate code, right? So to reduce all these things, this particular own annotation would do, and I just say in the main method Spring application dot run demo application dot class. Where this demo application is coming from, same here. This class name itself. Any argument you wanted to pass, you can pass. Right. So before creating one basic another class on own, I also want to just show one more thing. I had this HTML ready with me, right? What this HTML file is going to do? Very simple only, nothing much complex. If you go to this desktop, you see, open this, it is going to just say hello world, right? Otherwise, if you wanted to open the browser, you can open. You can open HTML browser like any other HTML files in the browser. I hope you're aware of that. It's going to point to my local file systems where that particular file is located. It says hello world, right? That is what we have given here also. I'm just creating an HTML head and body. In body, I have just said hello world. And what is this type of creating a web page called? I think yesterday we saw that. I don't think any new people, any new persons today class, or everyone is the same person who came yesterday. I hope few people are there from yesterday's session. What is this type of HTML file called or web page called? Yes, static. Exactly, Deepa. So it's called a static web page, right? The static web page are going to be served from a server only. It's not like if I wanted to put this particular HTML file, HTML document to host it in a server, it is very well possible to do that. Obviously, if you put it in a server, it will have an URL. If you hit that URL, this hello world, exactly whatever you see here is going to be displayed. Instead of having it in a local, you're having it in a server. And maybe for the people who doesn't know this, right? GitHub, I hope you people are aware of what's a GitHub. You can host a static web page in a GitHub itself. Hosting of static web page is possible in GitHub. So what most people use this for is like professionals use to create their resume, and obviously creating a resume in a HTML page is going to be much attractive and good, right? So you are going to people create this HTML page, static pages like this, and they can host it in a GitHub itself, and GitHub will provide a unique URL for you. Once you hit that URL, your profile page will be loaded. So you can access anywhere across the internet. I hope for people who doesn't know, maybe try this out. You can Google it, how to host a static web page in GitHub. It will come. And I hope people you're aware of what's a Git and GitHub. I don't want to elaborate, I guess. Or anyone new to Git and GitHub here? Okay, no. Okay. So again, to just for a context, Git is a kind of a version management system where you can track all your file changes and put it in a central repository, right? Right. So we have created one sample HTML page, and we have opened this particular thing in the browser, and you can see this hello world here. What if the same is served from a server? How it will be? Right. So we'll try to simulate that thing. Right. And if you go to this form.xml, we have this thing called, okay, I'll come in a minute to that. Okay. What I will do, I will try to create a new package called controllers. So in a model view controller, what is a controller actually? Someone was asking what's the cost for the course, or we are going to develop a dynamic web app in the course. Yes, we are going to develop a dynamic web app, and I hope the cost related things, I hope you can speak with Rahul. I think it's 10,000 for full lifetime access. I'm not sure at this point what is the thing now. You can contact Rahul for that. And for the sake of the question, yes, you are going to create a dynamic web app itself, right? So I just ran this application. I just wanted to show a thing to you. Okay. Just don't worry about what is happening in the previous thing. Just to see this part which I'm highlighting alone. As you can see here, Tomcat has started and it's running the port 8080. So I'm stopping this thing here, right? I just wanted to understand from you, like, what is a Tomcat? Why it is running automatically? Why it is there, and why we have to use Tomcat? Okay, it is a server, right? I accept it's a server, but what server? There are two types of server, right? Okay, maybe I'll touch upon that. So when I say repeatedly server, there should be some technology in the backend to handle all these requests, right? Coming, this traffic, what type of request, everything should handle, right? So there are two types of server called. Now, please note that it's very, very confusing for beginners to understand. Web server and app server. So Tomcat, and there is one more web server typical example is Tomcat, which is very, very famous for Java. And one more very, very famous server, which is particularly useful for redirection of all these traffic, web server is called Nginx. Anyone have heard of this? Tomcat, obviously, many people would have heard. What about Nginx? Anyone heard of this thing called Nginx? Yes, I think many people have answered correctly. It is going to be hosting your application. Yes, exactly. Yes. So this engine is the web server, which is going to act as a Tomcat purpose also. But primarily, what Nginx is used in the industry is like, for example, if a request is coming from this port, I wanted to reroute this particular kind of request to the another port. So kind of rerouting this Nginx is particularly powerful and useful. It's used for that. Tomcat is again a web server, which is going to use all the handle all these web traffic coming into request is going to come to Tomcat only. We were previously talking about this jar and war files, right? So when you wanted to host this particular war file, you are going to put this inside a Tomcat project structure only inside a folder called web apps. Then only if the particular thing is when you install Tomcat on your own, you get to know all these things. With the Spring, what is another advantage is like Tomcat comes bundled inside itself. You don't have to install Tomcat separately. Right? So there is inside this Tomcat, there's this folder called web apps. I'll write the name. Web apps, right? So you have to put this war file inside this web apps only. It will unpack all the web files. It will find where to run all those things. It will take care. But your job is to put this particular thing in a web apps folder. But in case of Spring, it will going to automatically do all those things. You don't have to do all these things. But again, we know what's a web server now. But what's an app server, application server? How is it different from a web server? Yes, Spring is a typical example of how you will be able to create a web server, right? So all the traffic from the internet is going to first hit this web server, either Tomcat or Nginx, and then only it will read the request. It will be redirecting into an app server, which is running inside another container like this Tomcat, right? So understand that web server and app server are different. Web server are something like Tomcat, where you put everything here, and the app server is something which is going to run inside a web server, so that the traffic from the web server is going to rightly redirect to this particular app server, right? Yes, like Spring Boot app, exactly. So Spring Boot is a typical example of an app server which is going to run inside a web server. And first, the any request coming from your internet is going to hit this web server, and from there it's going to be directed to your app application server, and the response from the application server in turn will be coming back to your web server, and in turn to your client like browsers. So that is how it works, right? Typically, Tomcats runs in this port called 8080 default port. If you want, you can change the port. It's a different story. So generally, if I run this application, a Tomcat, which is defaultly packaged along with this particular thing, is invoked, and it's going to run your application for you, right? So next thing, what we have done is like create this controller package. and we have to create this, let's say create a class to simulate the same hello world example. And let's say we'll create a class here and we'll say hello world controller. Please note that naming of these classes are very important. If it's a controller, just name it as a controller. If it's other type of classes, we'll see what are different type of classes available in a development kind of environment. But we'll just know. I'll say what's a controller shortly. We'll just name it as an hello world controller, and we'll click on finish. Right, and class is created. So yesterday we were talking about this MVC, right, model view controller, and each one is going to do a particular form. What's the model? Model is a data, right? What's the view then? What is the view? What is the view and what's the control? Just wanted to understand from you. Yes, the view is a kind of an HTML representation of whatever you're going to see in the real time, right? And what's the controller then? Yes, view handles UI part, exactly. Controller is the logic. Yes, exactly. You can say it's a logic, or you can say like the entry point of any application, or you can say like what type of data it is going to serve, whatever. Endpoint, yes, exactly. I hope, yeah. Okay, I think almost all of you get right answer. What kind of view? Yes, exactly. What kind of view it is going to be decided by the controller, and that is going to be decided by the endpoint, right? And in turn, the any request that is coming from your client, yeah, just understand this part. It's very important. Any request that is coming from the client like browser, it's going to first hit your web server like Tomcat or Nginx, and from the web server, if the request is coming to your app server, it is going to hit your controller class only, right? You can have many controller class for different endpoints, but understand that the entry point, starting point of your application server is the controller class only. This is where your first traffic gets routed, right? That's very important to know. So for this to work as a controller, so we have to tell the Spring, right? Hey, this particular class is a controller only. There are some mechanisms to do. Previously, before this advent of this Spring Boot and all, what was the thing that we used to do? We had to put an entry in application context.xml, which we don't want now because the file will grow huge and it's not easy to maintain. So what is a simple thing they have given? Again, they have given this annotation to handle all these things very easily. If you annotate with a particular class or method with an annotation, every process is going to be happening in the background, right? There's an annotation called @rest controller. You can see here, right? Rest control annotation is there. I'm just going to use that. So when I say this class as a @rest controller, it means this class is going to act as a controller. Otherwise, in other words, this class is going to act as an entry point for our request, right? So this is very important. This is very important to note, this annotation. And another annotation is like, see, when I'm saying this is an entry point, that means what? Any get request that is coming from client, put request, post request, delete request, whatever requests that are coming, it is going to come to this class only. Agree or not? Agree? Yes. Okay. So there is one more annotation to handle all these get requests that are coming. Let's for simplicity's sake that we'll assume this particular class is going to handle a get request. And if you wanted to handle a get request, there's an annotation called @get mapping. Right? And inside this get mapping, I have to put what is the endpoint I am going to able to configure for this particular annotation. What's an end? Okay, before coming to this, what's an endpoint actually? Let's take any example. Okay, you know this. Yesterday I was talking about a CDNs, right? Please note this. This Bunny is one of the famous CDN providers actually. If you go to the storage section, you can create your own storage zone. You can put all your data. See, they are providing 1000 GB of data here. So this is one such example of CDNs which is used to store the binary files like movies, videos, and those things. Right. Just take a note of this. Here, in this particular URL, what is an endpoint? Any idea or any guesses? Okay, two people said this add is the endpoint. What any other answers? Okay, many people are saying this add is the endpoint. Okay, some person was asking it will start after this question mark. Okay, so understand that whatever starts after this domain, that's endpoint. So in this case, endpoint is /full zone /add. Right? Thus we'll be clear about this. So endpoint in this particular example is /full zone /add, totally together. That's an endpoint, right? Endpoint is a kind of a resource which we are requesting to a server, right? And what is the remaining part? What is this panel.bunny.net? It's a URI, right? It's nothing but a panel is nothing but a subdomain. Bunny is a domain, and this that is the it's a kind of a representation of what kind of thing is going to be there. Right? Bunny.net is the domain itself, right? You can use a .com domain or .org, .net, .a, whatever. Many domains are coming nowadays. Right? So bunny.net is a domain, panel is a subdomain, and this once you have configured your application and hosted in any web service or cloud, you'll get a domain allocated for you, right? Let's say bunny.net is your domain, and apart from that, you will be needing to configure this endpoints also, right? You cannot just simply rely on this single domain route endpoint to get all the data. In this case, full zone /add is one endpoint. If you go to the storage section, /storage zones is one endpoint to get all this data. If you go to statistics, statistics is another endpoint to get the statistics. So now we understand the purpose of endpoint, right? Endpoint is going to serve a different kind of data based upon what they are going in the endpoint. Right? As simple as it. Yes, host name. Yeah, correct. This is the host name, you can say. And someone was asking what comes after the question mark. If you might have seen something like a question mark, ABC is equal to 1, 2, 3, something like this. Whatever comes after this question mark, we call this the query parameter. Right? What's the query parameter? Query parameter is something. See, we have requested this endpoint for statistics, but what if I wanted to narrow down my search in the particular server, in the database which I'm looking in? What if I wanted to have a statistics of this particular field called ABC, which contains this value 1, 2, 3? So those kind of basic information, the get request, you can pass in the endpoint using this query parameter itself. So that is why it's called query. You're querying your database. using some parameters, right? That's why it's called query parameter, right? Yes, for filtering, exactly, to fetch the exact value. It's like a where class, exactly, where class in SQL query. In your URL word, it's kind of fun. You can compare to a where class in SQL query. You can say that. Exactly. So now I have this application. I wanted to assign an endpoint here. So now we have seen this, right? This slash statistics on endpoint. This is the endpoint that they have configured. Let's assume that this Bunny CDN is using this Spring Boot in their backend. Okay. So they would have configured this slash statistics as one endpoint to get any data. Like similarly for our hello world example, we'll use slash hello as one endpoint, right? So whenever you hit your URL, it will be like the domain and .com and slash hello. So once you do that, this whatever data that you are going to return will be available in the browser, right? So we can't say it's an endpoint. Don't get the, if you're trying to ask people, maybe you can be a little more elaborate. Okay, meanwhile, no, this question mark, whatever comes after the question mark is not an endpoint, it's a query parameter. We don't call that as an endpoint. All right. It's a query parameter. Okay. So now my goal is to return this particular thing called hello world, right? Whatever I have, I'm able to simulate in this particular HTML page which I have written explicitly. I'm going to do the same in my server side. I'm going to create a method, public. Note the return type of this method is string. Maybe I'll give a method name. Method name really doesn't have any significance in development thing, right? Especially in controllers. Method name do not have any significance at all, especially in controller class. You can give any method name for that matter. I'm going return hello world. So here what I'll say just return. It's a return type of string, right? I'll just say hello world. Right. So what's the difference between endpoint and query parameter? Okay, that's what I was explaining. The endpoint is something like you are requesting for this particular statistics here in the Bunny example. Whereas query parameters like what exact statistic you want. Let's say the statistics is you going to serve you all the things: bandwidth used, request served, catches, hit, everything is going to serve for you, right? But what if I wanted to narrow down my search and wanted to only this bandwidth, right? I can do something like this. Right? If I'm configuring the Bunny, I can use say like stat is equal to bandwidth. So if I put something like this, it's going to take to me a page where only bandwidth related details are explicitly displayed. So to narrow down your search, which is going to be able to search in a particular server, you are going to use this endpoint. Okay. Coming back here. So I'm going to return hello world. My job is pretty much done here. Let's say I'm running an application. Run as Java application. I wanted to pay attention to the things happening here, right? It says starting this application using Java 1.8. It's too important to know all these things actually, right? And to process ID is this, right? And there is no profile, active profile set. We'll come to what's the profiling in Java maybe a little later. And dev tools is set to active. We saw what's a dev tool, right? Which is set to active. and Tomcat is initialized at the port 8080, which means this application server is running in the port 8080 of the Tomcat web server. Right? And initialize the application. Tomcat has started and application has started. Right? Now we want to test this application and see whether this hello world is coming correctly or not. This is what request. There are many HTTP requests, right? What request for we have configured? Get request, right? So I also wanted to understand from you people, anything you hit in the URL is what request. Let's say I'm hitting this here, I'm getting this, yeah, it's loading that HTML page, right? I'm hitting the statistics, it's going to return me this particular statistic page. What are these requests that are hitted from URL? Yes, correct. So any request that is hitted from URL is a GET request, right? As simple as that. Similarly, you can get a request here. Now, this Tomcat is running. We see this logs coming as Tomcat is running. But where it is running actually? It's running on the port 8080, that's all right. But in which computer it is running? It's a server, but it's running in my local computer, my machine, right? It is running in my computer. That means what? It's a local host thing. It's not an internet. It's running in my local. If you see this, every computer has this file called hosts file. Right? I hope at least one time you would have heard of this term called HOSTS. So that is where you specify what is the local host connection, IP address, and everything. Generally, for most of the computers, your local host IP address will be 127.0.0.1. Have you seen this IP address? It's a very famous IP address. It's a IP address of your local host, right? I will say local host, right? And I will say 8080 because my application is running in the port 8080. And for a port specify, you have to use this colon. Remember that. And 8080 is the port number we saw, right? When which port this Tomcat is running, it's running in the port 8080. So I'm using this 8080. It's running my local machine, so local host. And what is the endpoint should I give here? Hello, right? Let's see if it works. I'm hitting, yes, it works, right? It's coming as hello world, right? Same thing here. Whatever we simulated here, it's coming from the server itself now, right? I'm hitting this local host. What if I give some other name? Let's say world/world. If I hit enter, what will happen? Okay, someone was asking why should we give hello? It is because we have configured this endpoint to be /hello. Okay, some people said 404, some people said 400. 400 is obviously equal to a bad request. Right? Let's say what we are getting, it's 404, right? Not found. What's a 404? It's a not found error, right? It's not a bad request. Understand, it's not a bad request. 400 is a bad request, but whereas 404 is not found. So it means it is searching in the server whether this particular endpoint is configured, and no other endpoint is configured in this particular thing. So it says 404. Right? Until now, is it good? Is it okay? So I'm going to say this hello. It's coming as hello world again. Just pay attention to this code. Maybe I'll just return in 2 minutes or so. All right. Just give me 2 minutes. Hey, hello. Yeah, I'm back. So this part of code is clear, right? There are no confusions to this, right? I hope it's clear. So what if I need to configure one more endpoint here? Okay. Let's say I'm putting something like this. I'm saying one more get mapping. And here I'm saying /hello/world. Right? Sending as a string, return second. What are the name doesn't matter actually here. Right? So I'm saying return hello world 2 or second method for sake of understanding and simplicity. So note that once I save this particular, if you can note this Spring is initialized, Tomcat is initialized and everything. Once I save this particular edit, what will happen? You can see it's initialized again. I'm not doing anything. Every Spring is initialized again, right? It's because of the dev tools which we have added as a dependency. That's the advantage of using a small usable things which is given by Spring, right? So dev tools is one such example. So it's going to automatically reinitialize my application server, Tomcat. Now if I say hello/world, it's coming, right? Second method. So there are, so now which we want to understand, like there may be some many get mappings which you can configure in a single class across multiple classes. Like I can create one more class, controller class here. I can move this get mapping to the other class also, provided that I annotate this particular class with the address controller annotation. Right. So far, so good. So what happens if we do something like this? Just take it for example. Unknowingly, in some other class or any other class, what I'm doing, I'm just configuring this. Right. Same endpoint for two different methods. You can see here as an exception thrown. So these are the areas if you are an aspiring developer or you are already doing some things, right? These are the areas which you have already taken care. So it says error creating bean with name. I'll come to what is this bean. Maybe if time is there, we'll see it today or tomorrow with a name. In this name, request mapping handler. Right? In this particular class, hello world controller. And what it says illegal state exception, ambiguous mapping, which means what? Ambiguous means what? What's ambiguity? I'm not able to decide what to do here. Right? I've configured same get mapping with two different endpoints. I don't know which one to use. That's an ambiguous mapping, right? I don't want that. So it says this is the most important point to note. There is already an hello world bean method in use. Okay. So understand that this bean is this word you'll be coming upon very frequently in upcoming sessions, right? Or in any development world in respect to Java, you will get to know this term called bean, right? So what, before coming to bean, we need to understand what is a Java objects. What's an object in Java world? Any answers? Memory address. Obviously, everything is stored in the memory. So yes, someone was saying reference. Yes, exactly. It's a reference to the particular class, right? You create an object for the class means what? You're creating a blueprint of that particular class in a usable format. That's a creating an object, right? So for people who knows Java, how to create an object? Let's put a comment here, and maybe we'll try to do this. We'll stop this running of Stormcat. Close this also. Let's for time being, I'm assuming that it has a main method. Usually control class will not have a main method, understand that. If you wanted to create a class for this particular object for this particular class, what should I do? What is the syntax? New operator, right? I just say hello world controller equal to new hello world controller. If I wanted to call this method, then hwc dot, what should I do? Return hello world, right? This is how it works, right? Maybe I can do a system.out.println. What if I try to run this as a Java application in this class itself? It's printing hello world, right? I'm getting the same hello world in my browser because it's running as an application server, right? But understand that in Java world, to call any method, it's a method. Obviously, it's a method only, right? Obviously, to call any method, we'll be have to creating an object like this, and through that object, we have to call that method, right? Agree or no? Yes. So, but we are not doing anything here. But this method is called, and it's able to return this value. See, in typical Java world, we need to create an object, then only a method can be called. But we are not doing any sorts of things here. But still, this method is called, this hello world is returned to the front end. What is happening? Any guesses? Exactly, Raj, I answered correctly. Object is being automatically created by Spring. We don't have to create an object. Spring takes care of creating an object. So only we are annotating this particular thing with that REST controller. All right. And this particular thing of automatically, whenever a Spring initiates an object, we call that as a bean. As simple as that. Right. This bean is a very confusing term initially when you start the development. But understand that whenever we create an object like this, we call it as an object. Whenever a Spring creates an object, we call it as a bean. That's it, as simple as that. Right? We'll create, delete this. Don't want. So I'm not. I cannot do something like this. So again, I should go for this world, different kind of endpoint or slash world itself for that matter. Okay, let's assume that there is a scenario. Let's say there are some 10 get request get mapping annotation here for 10 different URLs, and all the URLs have default prefix called slash hello. Right? One is like slash hello slash, another is like slash hello slash world. Another third endpoint maybe slash hello slash world 2. Fourth endpoint maybe slash hello slash hi, whatever. The slash hello can be is common for all the get requests that are available across this class. There might be a possibility, right? It is also there. So what if there is some mechanism that is there to move all this slash hello? Instead of putting it repeatedly again and again here inside after every method, what if there is a mechanism to have it configured in one place and use it again and again? Yes, we can make it as a base path at the REST controller level. That is right. So I can do something like this. I hope Raj is already in development, I guess, if I'm not wrong. So then there is an annotation called at request mapping. All right. and I will say /hello here. Right? Configure the /hello at the class level itself. Right? So I can just remove this endpoint here. Okay, I have seen dev code while testing. Great. If you're, I totally encourage this thing. If people have access to dev code, please see that. Please try to understand that. Once you are able to capture what is happening there, testing and your use cases, your boundary value analysis testing, what are the data you have to do, what are the edge cases that you have to cover, becomes much obvious and easier. So here I can remove this entire bracket itself. I don't want to do, right? But here I can say I'll remove this alone, right? So this hello is common here. Whenever I hit /hello, it's going to come here. Whenever I hit /hello/world, it's going to come here, right? Let's test this. I'm sorry. To run this as the Java application. Let's test. So I'm saying /hello/world. It's returning the same thing. I'm saying /hello. It should return the hello world. Yes, it's working. So this is how you optimize your code. You kind of modularize your code to be able to make use of full Spring thing. So if you notice a thing in Spring here, nowadays everything is becoming kind of annotation here, right? So understand that Spring extensively relies on this annotation concept. Wherever required, it is going to create this. It is expecting you to put these annotations for it to do the job. So I was speaking about this bean concept, how the Spring is able to automatically create an object for us, and all these things are done here at this particular annotation called component. You don't this thing explicitly see this annotation explicitly, right? But this component annotation is responsible for creating an object because it will register your particular class as a bean in. I'll come to this. Maybe it's too much today. Maybe I'll come to this thing later. There's something called IOC. You will hear this term very frequently if you come to this development kind of environment. There is a term called IOC, which means inversion of control. Right? What's the inversion of control? What's the control? If I'm creating the class, I'm in control. What if I'm asking the code to create an object? I'm not in control. It's an inversion of control. Right? And all these objects are stored in a certain area called IOC container, inversion of control containers. Right? It's too much to subside now. I'll leave this to the next sessions or so. But understand that this component annotation is responsible for doing all this. That I can put this annotation at the controller level here. I can use these get mappings to get two different things here. All right. Okay, I'll unmute everyone. Maybe it's time to take some questions and wrap up the session today. So I have unmuted all. So yes, if syllabus is not shared, I will ask Rahul to share the syllabus. All right. Obviously, you'll get to know what are the things that is going to be covered. Otherwise, I'll share maybe at the beginning of the next session itself, or ask Rahul to share with you along with your email IDs or what or WhatsApp group that is created. All right. Links for the both webinars will provide shortly. I'll ask Rahul for that. What are required software to be installed in next class? Please install Java if you haven't. Please install Maven is defaultly coming with Eclipse. Again, if you wanted to work with Maven in command line, please go and install Maven. And I think pretty much it. Again, we are going to download all these Spring projects and dependencies from the internet. As you see this website called Spring Initializer, right? We saw, right? Just make sure that you have some basic understanding of core Java concepts, right? And if possible, try to install MySQL version or whatever version that is compatible with Java. I'm expecting you to install Java, Maven, and MySQL versions, which is compatible with Java. That's the expectation.
Karthik, a question. Karthik, this is Wilfred here. The question is like this get mapping is nothing but the endpoint, right? Of the
Right.
particular. Okay.
Right.
Then what is about the REST controller?
Okay. So the get mapping is specifically going to say it is going to accept only get request. So first we have to understand that. So it is going to explicitly handle only get request. Whenever I hit a get request, whenever I say /hello, it's going to return me hello world. Right? That's the first thing you have to understand. So we say REST controller for many purposes. One of the purposes, like I was talking about controller. What is the purpose of controller and controller class? Controller is type of data that we are requesting. It's an entry point to a particular request that is coming to the server. Everything is there, right? But how a Spring will know that your class is a controller? It will not know, right? Obviously, you have to annotate a particular thing with the REST controller. Or there is one more annotation called @controller also. That's for different use case. I'll talk about that. Generally, go with this @REST control annotation. So it will know this is a controller class. It will know it has to return the response from this class only as a generally as a JSON format. We are getting this as a string here, but again, this string is also kind of a JSON representation only, right? So that is the purpose of this REST controller annotation. And someone was also asking, like, we'll be able to create a REST API and deploy on our own. We have already created a REST API, right? What's a REST API? It's a combination of multiple endpoints. This /hello is one of the REST API itself. And at the end of this course, you'll be able to create your own basic app itself. I can assure you that. Right?
No, Karthik, actually, you mean to say that the REST controller will be where the Spring will be able to identify that this is the particular endpoint?
No, the REST control annotation will say the Spring is this is a controller class. This is the class where endpoints are configured. Right?
Okay.
Yeah. And what is the endpoint we are defining in the request mapping or in the get mapping?
Okay.
Timings of this course will be like again Saturday, Sunday 6 to 8. Same timing how we conducted all these 2 demo sessions, right? And someone was asking what is an annotation. Again, annotation is a special type of Java class which is going to be with @interface kind of representation, right? And you can create a declare a data type here, like whatever they say. And there's something called, I was talking about the reflections, right? You can just get what are the methods annotated with this REST control annotation. You can process all these things there in the reflection classes. It's a very big topic. It's an advanced Java topic. We'll discuss going forward. That's understand the primary purpose of annotation is to do something at the background so that your core logic is only here and doesn't get affected anywhere. And what are the basic concepts to revise? Just get to know the basics of core Java. Apart from that, whatever that is related to Spring or Spring Boot or development, I will handle. I will take care. It's a GoToWebinar meeting, and this is a live course. And yes, and we'll be having this recording also for you if you are interested to have a look at later. But I would please suggest, like, if you are really interested in development, if you want to switch your profile to development, don't just look at the course, just go and do that for yourself, right? In that way, once you do that yourself, everything is registered in your mind and it will be never getting erased in the second time. Someone was asking, how do I sign up? Sign up in the sense, I mean, I hope you're asking to sign up for this course. I think you can contact Rahul Arora for that. I hope there is a single course kind of payment or lifetime payment, I guess. I'm not sure. Just contact Rahul Arora for that. Someone else, Ram was asking, do we need to install database? Yes. We are going forward. We are going to deal with the databases. So better to install MySQL. suggest a website regarding MySQL? Nothing. You can just Google. MySQL is an open source version of from Oracle. You can just say MySQL download based on. You can download here. And any other questions?
Karthik, this is Wilfred here. I missed yesterday's class because of this timing. I'm not sure whether it was 6 or 8. They logged in at 8 and it was the class was ended. Can you just give like a 1 minute overview of this so that I will go through the record?
Whatever we took today?
No, yesterday's, because I missed just an overview about this.
Yesterday I was talking about this client server architecture, right? How a request is coming from a client, and what are the different protocols like HTTP and HTTPS, what are the differences, and how the request is coming from the client and processed in the server, how the data is fetched from the database, processed from the server, and converted to a respective JSON or XML format and returned back to the client. How a binary files like images, videos, or movies is served from the CDN. What are the authorization techniques, and how basic and OAuth authentication works, and how it is related to your server-side configurations, what is the cookie, how it is used, and what are the primary purposes of server-side scripting, and how if you have everything in the client side, it will overloads everything your particular browser, and why there has to be some logic that has to be in the background for the security purpose. So these are the basics topic that I was touching upon yesterday. Like what are the platform that is needed for this course to continue. Right? We'll take it slow and steady. And someone was asking like, I'll be conducting the whole course. Yes, I'll be taking care of the whole course. It's not like some instructor is going to come. Will the course will be API first and UI built in API? It's going to be API first, and whatever UI we are going to build, it will be kind of a templating kind of concept where we render all the data in a JSP format and we send back to the client. Right? We are not going to touch upon some frameworks like Angular or Ember. That's not scope of this course, because we are going to primarily deal with Spring and Spring Boot kind of concept. Okay, someone was asking difference between a API and REST API. Nothing, you don't have to think this too much. API is a kind of a very generic term, right? Libraries can also called an API. Yesterday I was saying what data is taken from the database from the server, is converted into a usable, readable format like XML or JSON using the method available in the server. One such method, maybe you can call this as a string. Right? It's a string representation. So these methods are called as an API. REST API is a specification, it's a framework, right? How you're designing your endpoints to work. Here I'm saying /hello/world, right? That's a specification I'm giving this particular REST API. So the REST API is a kind of a specification that you have to follow, some rules you have to follow. For example, if you are getting this employee details, it has to be /employees. If you're getting particular employee details, it has to be /employee/ID. It's kind of some good practice to follow that specification that REST API framework is providing, so that scaling this particular things are easy. Right? That's the difference between API and REST API. Any other thing? No, in MySQL, I think you have this non-paid version. Actually, you can permanently install. I don't have to do the trial versions and all. I think you are seeing this enterprise edition. There's some free edition also you can download. It's not like it's going to be trial only, right? It's an open source. Okay. I hope you had some productive session. I hope I was able to deliver content right. So we'll continue in the same pace. We'll be able to do something by the end of this course. All right. Someone was asking, do we need to learn API dev? I'm not sure what you mean by, okay, API development. I personally feel if you learn API development testing, API testing is nothing. It's less a breeze of air. Much simple. That's my opinion. Okay. So if there are no further questions, can we wrap up the session? Thank you everyone for joining, and regarding other details and courses and recordings, you can contact Rahul. Thank you everyone. I'm going to end the webinar.